Um, Good day, everyone. So this is the title of my work, as shown on the screen, the very first slide. Can I move to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay, so it's wonderful to be here, and I think I've learned a lot from the keynote. I've been following through. I've learned new concepts and new perspectives and approaches to the place of non-humans within the environment. Now, the rationale or the drive of my work is basically on the ground of the universal recognition of global partnership in terms of the pursuit of attaining sustainable future of human and non-human species. And it's quite puzzling that despite this universal recognition of global partnership, there is still some kind of skeptical doubt about the place of indigenous knowledge contribution. And of course, when we speak about indigenous knowledge contribution, we're also speaking directly about indigenous religious belief systems as part and parcel of indigenous knowledge and how they could contribute to the pursuit of sustainable goals or sustainable futures of humans and non-human species. So that's basically the drive of my work, to respond to that skeptical charge, and of course, to make some reference or a reference to the example of indigenous Yoruba thought of the Southwest Nigerian people, and how it could contribute to, the pursuit or attainment of a sustainable future for humans and non-human species. In this regard, we speak specifically about animals. So what I'll be doing throughout this brief PowerPoint presentation is just to tease out the major contributions of Yoruba thought to this skeptical charge, and of course, also to look at its contribution to the philosophical and ecological existing thoughts and ideas in literatures. So basically, this is the content of my discourse, and I'll be taking them one after the other. The next slide, please. So this is the central question I'm asking in the discourse, on the question of whether indigenous religious belief systems. Of course, when I talk about this, I'm making references to myths, beliefs, mysteries, and popular or common sayings can aid the advancement of a sustainable future for human and non-human species. And the response from my own little research is yes, but it has its own attendant contestations and issues. Of course, I mean critical challenges. The next slide, please. So it's important I also highlight what these skeptical grounds against the contribution of indigenous knowledge are. And I picked basically on some existing ideas within literatures on the doubt or skeptical charge against the contribution of indigenous knowledge to sustainable futures for our human and non-human species. The first is that indigenous contents, especially maybe belief, myths, mysteries, and all, are oftentimes considered to be time frozen, and they are also considered to be, space specific or cultural specific, which means that they are fixed in space and time. And the next charge, which I also could deduce from, existing literature argument, is that because they are fixed in space and time, they are often considered to be closed up, and they are rigid in structure. And the rigidity is as a result of the fact that oftentimes when people pass across, myths, beliefs, mysteries in explaining things that are not, rarely explainable in what we consider to be everyday lived experiences, they pass it down like a kind of memory part from one generation to the other. So it is often considered that these systems of thought are just a bundle of past ways of knowing or understanding things that may not, count up for explaining things in the present or current or contemporary time. And of course, we also have the charge, which is put against indigenous religious belief system, that they are oftentimes unscientific or unsystematic. And like I said the other time, they can hardly address the complexities of contemporary social change or the evolution of human and non-human interaction. Next slide, please. Despite this existing skeptical charge, there are, of course, considerable scholarly responses that has been given by, very renowned or foremost proponents of the defense of indigenous knowledge or indigenous religious belief systems. And one of them, or some of them, include Adewale, Briggs, and some other few persons who had argued that, number one, power relations and differentiation influence what counts as legitimate knowledge or otherwise. And here they are talking about how, the predominant supposed Western forms of knowledge provide a standard for screening what counts as knowledge or what doesn't count as knowledge. And anything that doesn't fit into the regimes of Western knowledge systems seems to be doubted, especially if they are from the indigenous context. And of course, Briggs makes it clear by also hinting at the internal and external factors of such a consideration. Briggs will not spare also the proponents of indigenous knowledge of this skeptical charge. Is of the view that they are the propellers of the internal factors of this. And one of the points he makes a very good emphasis of is that most proponents of indigenous knowledge belief systems or religious belief systems, they seem to also present the ideas, their ways of knowing as being error-proofed, and of course, not open enough for critical engagement. And of course, this renders those forms of knowing as being redundant for capturing unfolding realities or lived experiences. And also, Briggs recognizes or acknowledges the external factor of politicization of knowledge. This, of course, happens at the global stage, where there is some kind of a competitive edge about knowledge regimes that would suit or be suitable for footing the bill of the contemporary global demands of market or development. And of course, yeah, we are talking about the hierarchy of knowledge regimes that, seems to demarcate or create some kind of bifurcation between the global south and the global north. And also, even within the global south, there are also, the existence of the north within the south. These are some of the external factors that Briggs talks about. And there is also another voice that talks about some kind of refutation of the difference or some kind of refutation of the skeptical doubt or challenge against indigenous knowledge. And of course, this set of thinkers argues about the dynamic nature of knowledge, which is oftentimes influenced by the factors of social change, cultural exchanges of communication and learning procedures, diversity, multiculturalism, amongst so many other factors, which of course they consider it makes it difficult for them to imagine that there is any moment in the process of knowing where you can fixate knowledge as being indigenous as against being unscientific, because the evolution of knowledge is a continuous process. Therefore, one cannot fixate knowledge as being indigenous or being unscientific, and so on and so forth. Well, despite this existing laudable, defense against the skeptical charge, I felt one other way to respond to this skeptical charge is to try to substantiate if there is any heuristic value of indigenous religious belief system for ongoing effort towards the pursuit or goal of sustainable future for humans and non-human species. And it is in this direction that I decided or chose to embrace the Yoruba indigenous religious belief system. Well, the choice for it is not because of its exceptionality or its uniqueness from other similar indigenous worldview, but it's as a result of my own proximate understanding of the value of the projection of this worldview, since I'm also a Yoruba person, and I think I was brought up within the culture. So it's easy for me to use as some kind of intellectual leaning for receiving the contribution. So, but specifically, when I speak about reference to Yoruba church here, please, you can move to the next slide. I'm already there. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Specifically, when I speak about the Yoruba church here, I'm talking much more narrow. I'm not talking about the old system of Yoruba thought. I'm talking with emphasis on its exposition about the dynamics of human and non-human animal relations or interaction, and of course the implication for the pursuit of a sustainable future. And it is this that would lead to the necessity of, granting an exposition to what is the Yoruba thought, or what are the content of Yoruba thought about human and animal relations. So the first is that I also recognize and acknowledge that just like some other similar indigenous worldviews, the Yoruba thought also exhibits some kind of hierarchical cosmogonic understanding about the agency of humans and non-humans in such a way that it recognizes both the dependent and the interdependent dimension of the relationship between humans and non-humans. And of course, there are creative myths or creative stories about how the royal python descended from the sky with some primordial beings, and how the buffalo also embodied the presence of certain divinities or deities, and also how the presence of the decorous bird called the yellow palm bird signifies some kind of tranquility and peace within the abode that it is found. And I also looked at some of the cultural leanings of understanding about human tribal marks, the marks on indigenous certain indigenous subgroups within the Yoruba community, which is comparable to that of the antelope, this scarification on the face of the antelope, and how this seems to build a sense of kin ties between those subgroups and their lineage identity and their ancestry and clan, in such a way that any way in which you try to relate in an undesirable way with some of these animals that embodies the kin identity or the ancestral identity, is seen as if you are undoing your own survival, you are undoing your own generation of clan or kin. And that's why the issue of future generation is mentioned there. The next slide, please. Another point I looked at within the Yoruba thought is how animals are also represented in different forms of media. When I say media, yeah, I mean print media, visual media, new media, and so on. And of course, I had to make a reference to one of the typical comical serials that is used as a means or a device of civilization process for teaching children, which I also passed through when I was growing up within this community. And that's the Alawiye serials, where different stories are told about the tortoise, the rat, the hare, and they are used as some kind of symbolic embodiment of moral lessons for children, so as to build their relationship within the community, either at the interpersonal or personal level. I also looked at the instances of folklore, which is called Itan in Yoruba worldview, and how this also expresses similar objectives to that of the comical series. And also with the instances of animal representation in dramatic plays or new media, like the soap opera that was very common some 2 decades ago within the southwest of Nigeria. The soap opera is titled Adewale, which means shoe of trouble. And within the soap opera, they display or exhibited some kind of, the implication of belonging to a polygamous home, where a man had more than one wife, and each of these wives were in some kind of rivalry against each other, and they all have one animals that as a pet. And maybe the first wife has a cat as a pet, and he used the cat as some kind of moral nominalism, some kind of moral naming, in order to pass some kind of descent to her co-wife. And then she would name the cat something like Ewambi Waninu. Ewambi Waninu means beauty nauseates them, which is a way of using the image or the body of an animal as a way of passing some kind of resentment against her co-wife. The other wife may name a ram, which she keeps as a pet, Surulere. Surulere means patience is rewarding. Since she's the first wife and this other wives met her in the house, so she has to exercise some patience to be able to hit the fruit of her labor, in quote. So I also considered how animals are projected as embodiment of eco-fragility, conservation, and ecocentric order within the Yoruba worldview. And this is often seen through the performative act of beliefs, especially as manifested in lived festival practices or lived festivities. So we have the instances of, Osun Osogbo Grove, which of course was recognized by the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site sometimes in 2005, where people tour from different parts of the world and come for that festival. And then the representation of different animal bodies and how people deify and then how they sacralize those images, either in form of their living bodies or the dead carcasses of those animals. I looked at the implication of that for how it symbolizes some kind of, sacred relationship with animals. And I must say specifically that within such festivals, especially this Osun Osogbo festival and even Hunters Festival, some of these animals' embodiment of their symbolism is extended not just within them, it is extended beyond them to, also other associated life forms in which they are found. For instance, the example of the buffalo I gave the other time, if a swimming in a swampy riverine area, that water within which the buffalo is found swimming is considered as an embodiment of the goddess, which the buffalo is seen as an accomplice of, and such waters are exempted from some kind of indiscriminate treatment, like fishing, diving into the river for a swim, and so on and so forth. And of course, this is why I mentioned the factor of signifying presence of animals. There are other examples I can give, but because of time, I have to move on to some other things. The last one I looked at is also how within that Yoruba thought, it recognizes the use of animals as objects or utility. And of course, this is not only in terms of even the apparent practices of feeding on animals, using animals for hunting or guarding or for some kind of domestic purposes, but also even in the everyday proverbial saying that is still circulated to date. And of course, this seems to reflect some kind of priorities placed on the positionality of the kind of right of welfare or the extent of right to grant to animals. So I just picked maybe just two instances in that place, and that is the first one that says that one basically means that if a goat is doomed to die, it's better the goat die than I have to sacrifice my own comfort or my own survival to save the life of the goat. Some of these saying has their own caustic implication, but I mean, these are things that are circulated within the community. Then there is the other one that said, that one basically speak about, talking about space of comfort also, saying that where humans are even finding a place or a space to seek their own survival or comfort of sleep, then and a dog is occupying that same space when there is not enough space for humans to occupy. So this kind of sayings basically signifies an utilitarian or anthropocentric conception of the place of animals within the Yoruba community, and it gives less priority to animal welfare in that sense, even though in some other selective consideration, animals are seen as sacralized or embodied agents of symbolic presence of divinity and so on. But these two things exist, they exist side by side within the Yoruba context. And the next slide, please. And of course, besides reeling out all these exposition of the Yoruba thought on human, how does this inform or how does it respond to the skeptical charge, against the contribution of indigenous religious belief to sustainable future? And of course, I feel that there is a need to lead a response to that skeptical challenge. And I said the first response, which is the response one on that slide, is that there is need to sift through Yoruba thought's epistemological foundation on human and animal relations. Of course, one must admit here that this kind of epistemological foundation is basically relative. It's not the kind of universal epistemological way of knowing or relations about animal. It's relative to that Yoruba context of understanding. And of course, the works of Barry Allen and Shodipo on knowledge, belief, and witchcraft in Yoruba context have tried to provide some kind of epistemic distinction of understanding the Yoruba foundation of thought on issues of human and animal relations and so many other issues by making some kind of distinction between what is called putative belief, which is Igbagbo in Yoruba context, and Imo, which is putative knowledge in Yoruba context. And this could serve the purpose of, unraveling that epistemological foundation. And the second one, which of course I also feel is a critical issue to address, is the inherent contradictions of values on the status and role of animals. Don't forget that I told you that two kind of motivations or rationale exist within the Yoruba context, where animals are seen as utility or object of utility, and on the other hand, some selective considerations are given to some animals as kin, in terms of them embodying the one's ancestral history, clan identity, and kin or lineage identity. So this seems to presuppose some kind of tension or some kind of inherent contradiction in Yoruba thought, and I try to lead a response to that from, you can please move to slide 9. So the response to there, I said this tension could be better glimpsed from trying to entertain a complementary understanding of that Yoruba thought or foundation of thought about human and animal relation. Because these thoughts basically try to consider the lived experiences, the real experiences of human survival on the other, which includes animals, plants, and nature or environment, and also the imagined or mythologized conception of relations on animals, those that are sacralized, those that are seen as symbolic totems, and so on. And that this kind of complementarity, I would rather say it amounts to a form of paradox of essence, a paradox of essence, which is like a dual face of understanding that human relationship to animals is in both direction within the Yoruba context. It is intrinsic and it is also extrinsic. It's instrumental. Please back to slide 8. Slide 8. Thank you. So the last critical issue I think demands some kind of attention is what then is the import of this indigenous religious belief in Yoruba thought to extant or existing philosophical and ecological thought. Sorry, back to slide 9. Slide 9, the response 3. Thank you. And I responded that obviously, to an extent, Yoruba thought on human and animal relation influences the community, people's interaction with animals in both their domestic and wildlife spheres. And it impacts the ecological livelihood of the being of human and non-human animal in terms of the coexistence and the different forms of interaction. Either animals are used as form of entertainment, as symbols of totems, and so on and so forth. And it is in this sense that it propels some form of metaphysical understanding of human and animal relations. And I would not, I would entertain that to a large extent, this is not something entirely new or seminal, because it complements actually even existing ecological thought that prioritize the value of non-human life towards a holistic and sustainable environment. And this can be seen especially through the projection of, environmental ethical thoughts of deep ecology, weak anthropocentrism, neo-materialism, animistic belief that Dr. Hall spoke about the other time, and so on and so forth. So this is my whole brief. I don't know if it's brief enough to say that. Thank you for listening, and I would look chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing. Okay, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Okay, I will ask a first one. I thought it was really interesting that you talked about it both in terms of a kind of using the animal, so a sort of what we would call a dominion approach, but also understanding the symbolism and that interrelatedness of humans and animals. Um, how do you balance the two, I suppose, would be my question to you.
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yeah, you can reply, yeah.
Okay, so the point here, that's a very difficult question. I must admit, talking about balancing, um, because of course, if I speak from a point of view about, say, there is an homogeneous ways of interacting with animals within Yoruba context, I think I will be misrepresenting what the case is within this context. Because even from one clan within the Yoruba community, there are heterogeneous, manifestations of interactions with different species of animals. And so I can only deal with the manifest practices and also the circulations of beliefs that I found within that context. So and that's why I feel that looking at it from a context of some kind of mutual complement, at animals in a particular context are considered in a way or interacted with in a way, but in other contexts they are seen as utility. That so far is what I can make of that. That it's actually not a very balanced situation. So except if I would have to take a mainstream philosophical ideology to look at it as a dialectics of engagement with animals, then I can begin to speak from that point of view.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on the role of philosophy and directly engaging in indigenous beliefs when it comes to environmental projects and indigeneity. So just to give an example, in the United States, there's been some major environmentalist victories where people have rallied around indigenous American beliefs. So for example, in my home state, there's a national park called Bears Ears, which is one of the largest pieces of protected land. And the term Bears Ears comes from indigenous religious beliefs around the formation of that area. And it was the creation of the national park was initiated by several indigenous groups working together, and then people in the region standing in solidarity with them. But and then, that's a really good example of multicultural solidarity. But, for example, most of the European Americans who live there don't have a strong understanding of the religious beliefs that actually are driving the significance, but instead are just expressing their respect. So I'm curious about the philosophical and directly engaging with the beliefs and why you see that as being important.
Okay. Of course, that's a very legitimate concern. And I must say, yeah, that I have to give some kind of disclaimer that within the African context, there's been some kind of accumulation of a tradition of philosophical thought here. Of course, I know that some of you are familiar with that African philosophy, where there are some kind of, some kind of retrenchment of philosophical ideologies within the ontological context of African existence. And oftentimes this is seen from a point of, communitarianism. Of course, that is not something unique to the African context. And that state, the issue of participation becomes very important. And I can say that I know that in recent times, there have been a lot of churning out of, African environmental theories, trying to talk about how we can bridge, the role of philosophy with the question of indigenous belief in that sense.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to call it a wrap at that time so that we can move on to the next talk. But we really appreciate both your patience at the start of this, as we had technical issues at our end, but also your contribution. And so I think another round of applause for Adewale would be great.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you ever so much.